And I also want to thank Arit and the Turkish American Association for having me today. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah. Yes, I think. Well, ceramics. Today I'm going to talk from Lycia, and the ceramics are one of the oldest human inventions, as you know, and even small fragments are easy to recognize. Their shapes and decorations have been studied in such detail that dating is closer than any other artifact of the period. And they also provide crucial hints to understand the commercial ties and exchange between the ancient regions. And today, I'm going to present you some ceramics from Lycian sites from late antique period. And basically, I want to share my observations and hypotheses about interregional trade relations and cultural interactions between the Lycia and the Eastern Mediterranean regions, which is partly based on my PhD dissertation results from Marikanda. The ceramic examples that I will show you today were collected from Marikanda. And I will also share some statistics from Pottery to compare the density rates. And by the way, I'm grateful to the director of Marikanda, Professor Majid Tekinay, for allowing me to publish the late Roman pottery from Marikanda as a monograph. Also, especially, I want to mention some scholars who work on pottery in Lycia, like Erkan Dündar, Banu Yener Marksteiner, and Dilek Shen for their contributions and hard work, which are vital and definitely extending our knowledge. I salute them. Oops. Yeah. I want to talk briefly about the geographical and regional borders and the historical background to draw a frame. As you know, Lycia is located in southwestern Turkey and a very mountainous country situated on the Teke Peninsula. Basically, ancient Lycia was surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea on the south, Caria on the west, and Pamphylia on the eastern side. The steep geography of Lycia sharply divides the land into river valleys, coastal plains, and several upland basin-shaped valleys, which offer good pasture for sheep. Three great mountain chains determine access to and within Lycia. In the west, two suburbs of the Western Taurus Mountains, Boncuk Dağları and the Baba Dağı, and in the east, the greatest range of all, the Bey Dağları, standing well over 3,000 meters. Right in the early summers, one can see snow atop the two highest peaks in Lycia, Akta and Bey Dağı. The Lycians were really locked into their country as these three ranges cut off Lycia from neighboring Caria to the north and Pamphylia to the east, joining in the north of Lycia to form a plateau. This plateau, along with a lower range of mountains, served to cut off Lycia from central Anatolia. Travel was much restricted within Lycia itself because of these mountain ranges, and access to many parts of the country was practical only by traveling along the coast. The valley of the Santos River, which formed one of the mainland communications routes, could be reached from central Lycia only via Kalkan or through the Seki Plain via Oyananda. Both ways came through the other land communication route of the Elmalı Plain, the largest of the upland plains of Lycia. Ancient roads ran from central Anatolia through mountains to this plain and then down to coastal cities such as Antiphalos, Limyra, and Myra. The area was one rich with natural resources. The Akçay River, which is the largest in the northern Lycia, and two lakes were here and irrigated fields when they regularly overflowed. The water table was high and provided plenty of drinking water. Large cedar forests were nearby as well. Lycia has 4 rivers in total, like Santos River in the west, Limyros, and Arikandos in the east. At the mouths of these rivers are alluvial plains, the only level ground on Lycia. The Santos River was the longest and largest river in Lycia and the main water supply for many of the Lycian cities. It begins about 25 miles inland and empties into the sea at Pottery. The river provided the people of the Santos Valley with rich, fertile soil for planting as well as plenty of wildlife. The Santos Valley is long and relatively wide for river valleys in Lycia, 15 to 20 kilometers across for most of its length. Communication between cities in the valley was easy, and this area was the political center of Lycia for much of Antiquity. And four of the most important cities of Lycia were located here, Toulouse, Santos, Ponara, and Patara, and most of them located on the slopes of the flanking mountain ranges. Central and eastern Lycia is completely different territory, consisting mainly of a large number of small valleys separated by mountain ridges. This led to a large number of independent cities in Antiquity. The Elmalı Plain is also located in central Lycia. Some Lycian cities lay along the coast as well. However, most of the coastline is very rugged and inhospitable. Along the coast, a series of lower mountain ranges drop sharply into the sea. During Roman imperial times, we know that ferry services regularly ran between the cities, since overland passage between the two was very difficult due to steep mountains. However, despite the geographical limits, the administrative borders of Lycia changed during Antiquity depend on the political situation. It is well known that Lycia merged with Pamphylia by Emperor Claudius in the 1st century CE into a single administrative unit. And it remained so until the Emperor Diocletianus period, like more than 2 centuries. The political borders of the region changed again in the 7th century CE. Lycia, Caria, and the Pamphylia merged again to defend the area from Arabs. Obviously, those changes define the administrative structure and mean economic changes that allow collecting the taxes together, share the local agricultural productions and goods. Ceramics were also circulated with them without tax. So we should keep in mind those political decisions and radical changes affect the commercial ties. Significant historical events also were directing and changing the economic structure and redefined the relations. So late Antiquity as a term represents the transformation itself. And late Antiquity is a periodization used by historians to describe the time of transition from classical Antiquity to the Middle Ages in the Mediterranean world. Although there is a huge debate to draw the chronological boundaries of late Antiquity, it's generally defined as the period between the accession of Diocletianus in 284 CE and the end of the 7th century. However, we should note that the end of the period in the West and East differs due to historical events. Some remarkable events occurred in Lycia, which lights up our understanding, and we should mention them briefly. According to the historical records and archaeoseismological data, Lycia was hit by a strong earthquake in 240, which caused severely damaging the cities. We know the Emperor Gordianus III helped Lycians financially, but the recovery period of the impacted region would continue for years in the middle of the 3rd century political crisis. Moreover, the aftershocks came by Isaurian bandits. According to the ancient writer Zosimus, Isaurian bandits looted Lycian and Pamphylian cities heavily in Emperor Probus's reign. Due to the unfortunate ecological and political incidents, the late Antique period in Lycia could be started around mid-century, mid-3rd century CE. Moreover, the Gothic raids and the plague of Cyprian also devastated the Roman Empire in the middle of the 3rd century, and the population decreased significantly. Besides, the empire-wide persecution of the Christians by pagans proceeded during the 3rd century. It seems the instabilities in the region were continued until the time of Emperor Diocletianus. There is no doubt to say that administrative and monetary reforms of the Diocletianus helped to control inflation. He also radically redesigned the tax system. During that period, Lycia was started to rule by a military governor instead of the civil one, which points out the empire's security concerns. The execution of the Archbishop St. Methodius in Patara was a symbolic and important showdown of the resistance by pagans to protect the classical tradition in Lycia. The conflicts between the pagans and the Christians were continued until the Edict of Milan in 313, which declared toleration for all religions. According to historians such as Eusebius and Lactantius, after Constantine won the Milvian Bridge battle against Maxentius and became the sole ruler of the Roman Empire, Christianity flourished in the region as well as the other parts of the Roman Empire and declared as a legal religion. After all, Emperor Constantine had himself baptized by Eusebius, the Bishop of Nicomedia, shortly before his death. While these significant events were taking place on the imperial surface, Myra in the east became a civil and ecclesiastical metropolis and has arisen as a new political center in the region instead of Patara, the traditional capital of Lycia. The transformation was continued in the Eastern Roman Empire in the 5th century CE without interruption. However, Rome was continuously sacked by the barbarians and the western part of the empire collapsed in 476. But the eastern part of the empire and Constantinople has risen as a star. Political and commercial ties between the eastern provinces and the capital Constantinople increased asymmetrically, which served unification and integrity of the new empire. During that short-term wealthy period, Lycian ports played a significant role in the grain trade between the Aegyptus province and the capital Constantinople, because they were the last convenient landfall for ships from the west or Aegean before crossing the open seas to Levant. Besides, the granaries in Patara and Andriake played a critical role in regulating the grain trade. The scholars generally accept that the whole Lycia prospered in late antiquity for those reasons I mentioned. However, recent studies and the density level of imported pottery point out that the region's prosperity was limited with harbor cities like Patara, Andriake, or Olympos. Statistics that I will show you in the following slides, which gathered from Lycian settlements like Arikanda, shows that the inland Lycia less benefited from this prosperity. The Eastern Roman Empire, now we can call it Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, proceeded to flourish under Emperor Justinianus and General Belisarius's actions like expanding the borders for a short time and recapturing the North African regions from Vandals. However, those happy days have been ended rapidly because of extreme climate changes globally. Environmental and climatic disruptions affected societies and political systems deeply and caused significant consequences. Recent studies suggest that some historical events like the Nika riots and the bubonic plague might be related to global climate exchange. The cooler and less stable climatic conditions in Anatolia and Lycia must have rendered agricultural activities more marginal than before. When the agrarian economy and exchange system collapsed, globalism turned to regionalism and finally localism with a closed economy in the end. The eastern provinces of the empire, which were captured by Arabs in mid-7th century CE, were the last catastrophic hit for the empire. The new Islamic empire redesigned the system and wrote a story within a story. Yeah, I can hear that you're asking about pottery. And let's look at the pots. It seems that Lycia was used its geostrategic position and took economical advantages within this political ecology. Imported ceramics and their statistics show that commercial activities and partners transformed accordingly. I identified 6 different big trading partners of Lycia in late antiquity with the light of ceramics from Lycia. From 2016, we analyzed more than 8,000 shares in total and created substantial digital data sets in Arikanda. Since the beginning, the Arikanda excavation team did a great job. They provided secure datable deposits from the late antique quarter. So helpful to establish a type of chronology for ceramics from the 4th to 7th century. Let's start a journey with ceramics from North Africa through the Black Sea. It's well known that Africa Proconsularis, which covers mostly Tunisia and Libya today, is extremely important for the rest of the empire. Africa delivered a major part of the goods like grain, garum, the fermented fish sauce, wine, and ceramics for consumption. African merchants transported them mainly to the city of Rome and other provinces within the tax system of Annona. Archaeological explorations in the northern shores of Africa by various scholars unveiled numerous pottery workshops. African ceramics like red slit finewares and transport amphoras to carry the goods were not produced in a single center, but in towns throughout the northern Africa from the 1st to 7th century. But before the 4th century, African pottery was mostly exported to the western provinces. Production and exports expanded in the 4th century and became more visible in Eastern Mediterranean settlements. It can be argued that the workshops reduced their productions during the Vandal occupation in mid-5th century. However, the production scale increased again in the 6th century through the end of the 7th century. Lycian port served as supply center for those merchant ships coming from North Africa, which traveled to eastern and northern directions. This route might explain the widespread distribution of African wares on Lycian shores after the 4th century. For example, popular African red slip plates like Hayes Form 50, 67, and 91 distributed widely in Lycia. You can see it anywhere. Also, the Spateion amphoras was so popular, which carried mostly olive, and Kia type 55 and 62 amphoras also well represented during the 4th century and the 1st quarter of the 5th century in Lycia. However, there is a gap during the Vandal period, but late ceramic forms like Hayes form 104, Hayes form 105 showed up again in 6th and 7th centuries. According to Delection, the popular African forms represent Patara and consist of the 14% among the other red slip wares. According to Philippe, similar rays have been seen in Limura too. However, African imports in the countryside, like Arikanda or Balbura, represent just 3%. Naturally, these data shows that the people who live in coastal cities or harbors reach out to African products more easily than the inland Lycians, diversified the options, and followed the current fashions. This situation might also refer to the buying power of the people or the cultural choices. The importance of Egypt for empire increased enduringly during the late antiquity. Capital Constantinople was growingly dependent on Egyptian grain supply and other products because of the increasing population. This situation was creating an important political and economic link between Egypt and Constantinople without a doubt. Nevertheless, Egypt has never played a key role in exporting its ceramics widely except the transport amphoras that carried Egyptian wine. According to John Hayes, fine red slip production in Egypt expanded in late 4th century and found an opportunity to take over the market when the Vandals occupied North Africa. So the Egyptian workshops mostly imitated their counterparts like North Africa, late Roman D wares and late Roman sea vessels from until the 7th century. Egyptian grain must reach out to the granarium of Lycian ports more than its pottery. Obviously, from the 4th to 6th century, Egyptian-made vessels represented like just 1% of imported ceramics. We mostly see Egloff type or Aegyptus 3 type or late Roman 7 type amphoras preferred by the customers. We also know some Egyptian ware forms from the Delta area in small numbers. Pilgrimage in the Byzantine Empire involved the faithful Christian often traveling considerable distances to visit such holy sites as Jerusalem or to see in-person relics of sacred figures and miraculous icons on show from Thessaloniki to Antioch. The pilgrimage took off in the 5th and 6th century CE. The skeletal remains, items of clothing and tombs associated with holy figures, famous holy artworks and their potential for working miracles, the healing waters of sacred shrines, and even famous living holy men and women were also reasons for Christians to leave their homes and travel great distances. Although many pilgrims' final destination might have been Jerusalem, there were along the way many other stops of interest, such as shrines set up in honor of important Christian figures. These shrines dedicated to saints, martyrs, and men and women who had witnessed Christ's ministry were usually furnished with impressive buildings or were part of monasteries that tended the shrines and offered accommodation to weary pilgrims. Travelers needed plenty of stops because their progress was slow, limited as they walked or rode a donkey. Ships made the voyage quicker, but even when they arrived at the Holy Land, there were still large distances to be covered. Due to the fact those huge networks created by pilgrims, all sorts of relations between the Levant and the rest of the empire has improved. The wine and other products from Holy Lands became popular because Christians who live in different religions were affected culturally. Because of religious and cultural reasons, the Lycians bought Palestinian wines in large quantities. Late Roman 4 amphoras from Palestine consisted of one of the most found amphoras in Lycia and rest of empire. But in contrary to late Roman 4 amphoras, the bake-shaped amphoras are seen rarely in Lycia. This might refer to the network between the Lycia and Levant disconnected at one point around the mid-6th century. Moreover, some examples from Arikanda, Patara, and Limura show the Lycians are also imported cooking wares from Levant as Magnes type 1 or Jaleme forms. Arikanda pottery studies revealed that cooking pots made from local Lycian clay showing significant similarities morphologically with the Levantine counterparts like Jaleme or Kefar Hanania. The large quantities of late Roman 4 amphoras and the similarities between the Levantine cooking pots and Lycian examples raise some questions for me. In this matter, actually, I have some questions instead of answers and conclusions. Did some of the Lycians share the same food culture with Levantine people? If so, what was the main reason? Another question is that possible to explain it with the religious identity? Or did Levant-related material used by a specific community in Lycia? Maybe there were Levantine origin minorities in Lycia, or simply it was a reflection of fashion. Of course, it's hard to answer those questions with ceramics, but let's keep asking. It is now widely accepted that Eastern wines held an important place in Mediterranean trade during late Antiquity. The most famous of these wines, those that feature prominently in texts, are those from Palestine and I just mentioned. Lycia and Cyprus come after the Levant with their wines and significant role in the wine trade. The 4th century Expositio Tutis Mundi, thought to be a merchant's guidebook, noted that Cilicia was a major wine producer. The 7th century physician, Paul of Aegina, recommended Cilician wine in several of his medical prescriptions, suggesting that the region's vintages remained commonly accessible at the end of the late Antiquity. Recent discoveries unveiled amphora workshops in Cilicia, Isauria, and Cyprus, which produced late Roman 1 amphoras to carry its delicious wines. These carriers consisted of the most common amphoras from late Antique contacts in Lycia and other parts of the Mediterranean without a doubt. All subtypes of the late Roman 1 amphoras can be easily found on Lycian settlements. It means Cilicia and Cyprus have been one of the biggest trade partners of Lycia from the 4th century to the end of 7th century. Common cooking vessels forms made with local clays found on Lycia and Cilicia might show us the mutual food culture and connectivity, maybe, that might be shared throughout the southern Anatolian coast. Another trade partners of Lycia, definitely Cyprus and Pamphylia, indeed. It's known that the late Roman D ware or Cypriot red slip ware is one of the most widespread fine wares of the late Antique period, from the late 4th to 7th century. For 40 years, it has been thought to have been made in Cyprus, although no workshop had been found. Luckily, recent discoveries unveiled at least 7 production centers in Pamphylia in the vicinity of Pednelissos. The discovery of the workshops established southern Anatolia as the only certainly identified production area of this ware. That's why the late Roman D ware term would be a more accurate term to define the production koine rather than a single center like Cyprus. The statistics show that Alicia took the geographical advantage of this situation and were benefited from it as a neighbor region because late Roman D wares consist of the most significant part of the fine ware assemblages in Lycia. Almost every late Roman D vessel forms and subtypes represented in Lycian settlements without any chronological gap. That's important. We see all subtypes and variants, even in rural towns. For example, late Roman D ware represents the 71% of the fine wares at Arikanda in late antiquity. However, statistics from Pottery show differs from the inland Lycia. According to Dilection, late Roman D ware constitutes just 51% of the fine wares in Hurmalıkaman at Patara. These statistics indicate that the coastal cities reached out a variety of products more than the countryside. Sagalassos, located in southwestern Asia Minor in Pisidia, is another player in the market during the Roman and late Roman period. Although it had no access to any navigable waterways and even the nearest major road, it is told that the Sagalassos red slip ware distributed intensively to Anatolia, Italy, North Africa, and the Levant from the 1st to the 7th century. However, despite the popularity of Sagalassos tablewares among the other provinces and geographically imminent to Lycia, the Sagalassos wares were never found in large quantities during the late Antiquity. Sagalassos ware consists of just 1% of tableware in both coastal and inland Lycia. The numbers might be referring to that the Sagalassos was lost the market share after the 4th century for some reasons, and the trade connections cut at one point. But of course, we should have more data from the other provinces to conclude that. Aegean productions were reshaped according to the growing necessities of the capital Constantinople after the 4th century. They exported the tasty wines and oil of fertile Aegean plains widely by late Roman II and late Roman III amphoras throughout the empire. They also distributed the fine ware red slip made by Phocaean and Gurnaion workshops. However, Aegean origin pottery has never been popular among Lycians during late antiquity, in contrary to popularity in classical periods. The density rates from cities show that the demand for Aegean products is high in coastal Lycia, but very low in inland areas. While the rate of late Roman sea wares in Patara was 31%, it remained only 3% in Arikanda. Predominantly, Latroman C-form tree consisted of the most popular plates during the 5th century. It is possible that Latroman C wares came to Lycia as part of a larger shipment with other goods. According to Paul Reynolds, ships usually carried more than one type of goods, with fine wares often being only secondary cargo. They might have been transported alongside goods like oil, wine, and cereals. But in any case, it seems that the Aegean products lost their popularity in the mid-6th century in coastal Lycia too. During the late Roman period, transport amphoras from the Pontic region, it's so excited to see some Black Sea-made amphoras because they are rarely circulated in eastern provinces, in contrast to the Hellenistic and early imperial periods. So we have just a few amphora examples from Heraclea Pontica and Sinope in the Black Sea region. They dated the 4th century mostly. Pottery clays play a crucial role as evidence of material culture in answering a period's socio-economic structure. It is well known that during the late Roman period, there were hundreds of small local pottery workshops spread throughout the empire and produced ceramics with local clays. Some production centers like North Africa, Cyprus, and Pamphylia, of course Phocaea, grew much larger and supplied to local consumers and used all around the empire, including Lycia, as I mentioned before. However, the global economy collapsed irreversibly in the 6th century due to several ecological or political reasons. Purchasing power reduced significantly, and the circulation of the pots also affected by this new normal. However, local pottery workshops in Lycia increased their existing productions to meet the demand cheaply. Severin Lamatri and Jona Waxman made some archaeometric analysis on shards from Xanthos and Limyra, and these analyses proved that Lycian pottery workshops produced coarse wares through the Roman and late Roman period. In the light of these studies, I identified 4 clay types among the cooking wares and utilitarian wares of Arikanda. The archaeometrical analysis points out that the 1st and 4th clay types represent the Eastern Lycian origin, and the 2nd type of iron-rich Lycian ferromagnesian clays represents the Western Lycian origin. According to my observations, the clay type 3 is so similar to the Pamphylian and late Roman D clays, and they mostly used for utilitarian vessels. The circulation of those local coarse wares in Lycia points out intra-regional trades vitality throughout the 4th and 7th centuries. Moreover, the pottery studies in Arifkale, also named Lower Arikanda, told us the region's local productions might be continued until the 9th century. Additionally, the discovery of locally produced table amphoras in Arikanda revealed that the local goods like wine might also be circulated among the Lycian cities like Kianae, Limyra, Patara, and Leton after the 5th century. Moreover, the same type of amphora was also catalogued by John Hayes in Paphos, and he added a significant comment about it. He said that sherd probably not a product of Cyprus, which strengthening our hypothesis about form's production area. In the light of the clay features and finding spas of those amphoras, I suggest that vessels may be produced somewhere in eastern Lycia. But due to the lack of archaeometric analysis, we should be careful about the exact production center. Obviously, further investigations on clays would allow us to say more about in the near future. The further studies in Patara and Myra have improved the local red slipware production in Western Lycia starting from the early imperial period through Antiquity to meet the domestic demand. The recent studies in eastern Lycian sites, as Arikanda, Limura, and Rhodiopolis, revealed eastern local red slipware productions. The similarities of the vessel shapes and clay specifications taught the common productions by several East Lycian workshops. It seems that those wares mostly copied the late Roman D-ware vessel forms. The datable deposits of the late Antique quarter at Arikanda refer that wares started from the mid-5th century through the 7th century. That evidence shows the economic transformation of the region nicely from globalism to regionalism. I have some notes as a conclusion. Ceramic data and the density rates revealed late Roman Ds heavily dominated the market both inland and the coast in Lycia throughout the late Antiquity. This situation may suggest that a joint economic zone was established between Pamphylia and Lycia. It is possible to say that neighboring provinces may have tax-free or reduced prices on product exchange. Also, it might point to a common table culture and basic profession. The collapse of the global economy has led to an asymmetrical increase in local ceramic production. Data density showed that local red slip production in Eastern and West, as well as coarse wares, increased from the second half of the 5th century. That situation is possibly pointing to a drop in the quality of life in rural Lycia. However, despite the paucity of the variety of imported ceramics, which identified in the countryside, utilitarian ceramics increased over the course of the 7th century. This increase can be attributed to a possible migration of coastal inhabitants to inland, seeking safety presumably from turbulence caused by Arab invasions. Ceramics which gathered from Arifkali excavations demonstrated that ceramic production in the eastern Lycia were continued in the 8th and 9th centuries without interruption. I believe that this evidence will illuminate the Middle Byzantine period of the region. The fact that late Roman I amphorae are the most abundant commercial amphoras in all Lycia reflects that Cilician wines were among the most popular products in the region during late Antiquity. It seems that Lycians who lived in harbor cities reached more Aegean, Egyptian, and North African goods and ceramics than in the countryside. Those ceramics provide strong evidence that the alleged prosperity in Lycia is actually limited to the coastline. So maritime activity growth may have caused a decline in inland traffic, so that once important urban centers that derived income from servicing inland routes or supplying networks of settlements with goods lost a crucial economic source base. Also, the internal migrations from the countryside to the coastal cities diminished the population, and it might be reflected the economic structure and buying power of the inland settlements after the 7th century. Of course, it's hard to test and conclude those hypotheses with ceramics, and we should be careful about the decline and prosperity theories. However, we should keep asking questions and light up the reasons behind the social and economic facts. There is no doubt that the pots, shapes, and decorations were changed during the late Antiquity. But more importantly, the diet and the food culture also transformed radically with the influence of new incomers and migrations. The design of the table reshaped. During the 4th and the 8th century, vast stretch of Europe and Mediterranean shifted from growing wheat to rye, for example. It might reflect the new closed peasant economy. That's my opinion. Thank you for all.
Thank you very much, Asil. You gave us quite a bit to think about. I'm sure we have questions now. Can I start with the first one? It's kind of a general question.
Yeah, please.
So you mentioned that in 5th and 6th centuries, there's an increase in pilgrimage movement towards the east in the Mediterranean.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, that and that I guess continues for a while, for a couple of centuries. Is that a separate thing from the economic circulation of the pottery you've been discussing, or do you see a parallel with that? I mean, with the transportation of people, I guess, to the east. Maybe it's a form of tourism, you can say, the pilgrimage tourism. Do you see a
Hmm.
parallel between the development of economy as you see it in the pottery with the increase?
Definitely, I believe they created a fashion because people who lives in the West or in the Lycia, they wanted to
Benim aldım
imitate
Sivas'ta.
the
O çok
imitate
güzeldi.
the Holy Lands, actually, the people who lives in Holy Lands, and they wanted to share the same pots, maybe like the same faith. I see many parallels with the pottery and the people exchange, united people bring
Mhm.
together. That's my theory because we see uh, really big similarities along the South Anatolian coast with the Levant corsairs. This reflects something because there's no similarities with Aegean or Egyptian or Western pots like this scale.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's ask some questions. Why? What was the main reason?
Any other questions? You can unmute yourselves and ask questions.
I'm Anna from Jerusalem, so I'm very interested in your connection between basically Anatolia and the Holy Land, and I'm working exactly on those periods. And what I find very interesting is this issue about the late Roman D wares,
Mm-hmm.
because as we always assumed, or thought we assumed, that they were made in Cyprus, as you
Mm-hmm.
said, doesn't make sense. And I have huge quantities of late Roman D wares on sites that I'm working on, coastal sites, inland sites, north, south, doesn't matter. And it would be
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to do some kind of comparison between the material you have, the late Roman Ds that you have, and the late Roman Ds that I have, because I'm pretty
Mm-hmm.
sure
Mm-hmm.
they're not from Cyprus, because then it's way too much and it doesn't fit, you know, like chronologically, and it just doesn't fit. So thank you very
Mm-hmm.
much. That is very, very interesting, and we should continue working on that. So if I can help you
Definitely.
with anything here in Jerusalem, let me know.
Mm-hmm. I really want to see your pots too because my main theory is there was a connectivity between the Levant and Cyprus and Lycia too. They created economic zone. Maybe they had tax-free exchange or reduced prices. There should be some powerful reason behind this,
all
not
those
just cultural or religious
all
one.
those jars that you showed, those Gaza jars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they probably contained really gazetión, the wine, the famous wine, which is exported. But
Mm-hmm.
so much. I mean, also I have my doubts that these jars were used only for wine, but they were
Mm-hmm.
used probably also simply as transport containers and produced as
Mm-hmm.
transport containers, because we have now excavated probably another 10 or 15 production sites of
Mm-hmm.
Gaza jars.
Yeah,
So, I
that's right.
mean, how much wine can you produce? You can. How much wine can you drink and export, or export and
Mm-hmm.
drink? So I suppose these were not only wine jars, but they were used simply as transport containers good transport containers, easily easily to be shipped all over the place, because now we are finding them more and more throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. So that's also another question. So we should really compare
definitely.
our notes.
You're definitely right, great. But this connection, this connection should be cut at some point, because we don't see back-shaped amphora so much like late Roman IV amphoras, especially in inland Lycia.
You mean the Gaza jars? I don't. We don't use the late Roman IV term. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. Of course.
Okay, so it's the Gaza jars, you mean? Okay. So they shouldn't be called Gaza jars, anyways, because now we know that they were produced on the coast. Let's say from Gaza, Ashkelon, almost up to Tel Aviv. So they shouldn't be called Gaza jars. So you're right. Okay. Let's call them LR. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
I have a question.
Sorry, Charles. You want to go ahead?
Oh, okay. I wonder, are there other types of objects present at Arikonda and other Lycian sites that speak about trade relations in this period, like metal objects or I don't know, ivory, bone things?
Yeah, we know many ampullas, the flasks actually from Levantine sites or made in Lycia too, especially in the religious centers or monasteries. It reflects the cultural and religious connectivity between the Levant too. I know many examples from Mura, but less examples from Arikonda. Just one or two ampulla we have.
Any other kinds of object? What else is there from Arikonda in this period? What other kinds of objects are made?
Actually, just pottery tell us something, not coins, not other artifacts, just ceramics. I know, imported ceramics.
Okay.
Because Arikonda, the population of Arikonda diminished after the 5th century, and they moved to Arifkale. They established a new town there, and they expanded during the Justinianus period because it was more secure, defendable area when you compare with Arikonda. But the ceramics tell us more, because when I analyzed the pottery from Arifkale, the pottery production continued in 8th century and 9th century too. It's new.
Good, thank you.
It means that the inland Lycians, they did not affected from the Arab invasions.
Thank you.
Yes.
I actually have another question.
Oh.
Yeah.
How about if we get a question from Andre?
Sure.
Yes. Congratulations on this very, very interesting presentation, and I'm very pleased to see that Lycia it's going to produce more and more Pontic amphorae. I've seen a recently good presentation given by Philip Weiss on Lyra amphorae, and now presented this very interesting discoveries from Patara. I think Gandhidar also has published an interesting paper on amphorae from Patara and Skilis, and he also has some unknown but which are Pontic amphorae, like very nice this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and also looking at your plates, I think that number 459 could be also Pontic and not Egyptian. Also, number 455 looks like a Levantine amphora, not key 62. Those North African amphoras don't have such cannelurous ridging on the neck. And also it's very impressive to see that we have identified this local production for Lycian tableware, and so you can see that globally we can talk of a certain kind of globalization, but provincialization was also very, very strong. I've seen this so-called local provincialization working on Pompeiopolis in northern Anatolia. And it seems to be a normal general process of adjusting local needs to the possibilities of productions, and relying more on this local production than on imports. Also, I'm very skeptical about so many statistics made on tableware, which is can be very easily broken and provide us sometimes with a very distorting view about these imports. Otherwise, thank you very much. And if you have more questions about Pontic amphoras, you can write to me anytime and discuss in details. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. It's great to see you, and your suggestions also and opinions is important for me too. And I will definitely write you to if I found more amphoras from Black Sea region, because you know many examples from Berytus or from Alexandria too. But it's new to see some Black Sea origin amphoras from Lycia. Hope to see more and more.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anna had a question. Oh, and then Lut after Anna.
Thanks. I was thinking, if you have imports from the Holy Land, when you're saying that there was, let's call it pilgrimage tourism, or whatever you want to call it, do you have any lamps? You know, the late Byzantine, we call them late Byzantine, 6th century lamps with Greek inscriptions? Or do
yes, Anna, we know huge amount of lamps from religious settlements or monasteries in Lycia. I had no access to show it today, but I know they are, especially from Mura or some monastic organizations in inland Lycia, but not in Arikana. It's so interesting. Just one or two example I can tell about, but
are
that's
those
all.
The lamps? I mean, you know which lamps I'm talking about?
Yes,
the
yes,
slipper lamps with those, because those we have these were probably, or let's say pretty sure that they were produced in and around Jerusalem. So here you would have something, pilgrims come to the Holy Land and take back these kind of lamps. I can also send you some other vessels that were like small juglets produced in and around Jerusalem, which I have found in Bulgaria. So they were actually mementos or souvenirs or religious pilgrim souvenirs that were carried around. So that would be very interesting to see how much of this material arrives to your part. I don't want to take time for
Yeah, before we
Okay.
move to Lut, I just want to point out, if you're not looking at the chat, that Majid Hoca, Majid Tekinalp, the director of the Arikan'da excavations, is saying that a footnote and answer, we found some pilgrim tokens in Arikan'da pointing to the same geography.
Ah, thank you, director. You saved me.
So Lut.
Thank you very much for this very interesting lecture. I have, maybe not surprisingly, a question about late Roman D. You say that 5th to 7th century, that it looks as if the Lycians went more locally with their pottery. But if I have not seen it wrongly, you still have 71% of late Roman D in your assemblages. So that's not local. And I mean, the production centers that you talk about are the production centers that we found in Petnelissos, which is not Pamphylia, but Pisidia. So there again, they are not on the coast. So they first have to be somehow brought to the coast and then traded there. So why would you then say that they, I mean, I know it's the general theory, and I also think that that people reduce basically their
Oops, sorry, just 1 second. Sorry. Can you unmute?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's all right. So how do you see that then? Thank you.
That's that's a great question, because I ask it regularly, this question. What's locality? What's the scale of locality after the 5th century? And what was the administrative borders or economical advantages between the neighbor regions? Actually, we don't know the whole details about it. I just argue that they might get cheaper products than North Africa or Aegean sites. That was the main reason. They kind of made some economic maybe agreements between them, shared goods and products. Yeah, I know that's just a theory, not, I can't prove it, but I think they shared the same food culture too, same table design, maybe the same foods inside the pots. That's my theory. There was a triangle between Lycia, Pamphylia, and maybe Cilicia too, and just Pisidian towns also joined them. And
Okay,
we can accept.
Still doesn't explain
we can
why.
accept them. We can accept them. The local, all of them, maybe the late Roman Ds.
But somehow they must have preferred late Roman D over the local tableware.
That's right.
I mean,
That's
it looks
right.
from what we found in the Petnelissos Hera, it looks as if there were a whole lot of small local production centers. And the reason why we only know 7 is that not more survey has been done, in my opinion. So it might be something that is true for the whole region. And I'm not just talking Pisidia, but the whole.
Yeah, it's another fact. The Eastern Lycian red slip wares heavily imitated the late Roman D wares after 6th century. It means they produced locally but followed the tradition, the morphological tradition and everything. Yeah, that's another fact.
Any other questions? Can I ask something? This also comes from my lack of knowledge of the period. But for the amphorae, you were discussing it in the context of wine production. But what about production of fish oil, garum? Wasn't that a big economic deal back then? And didn't they use amphorae for its transportation?
Actually, Elif, it's all about the buying power. If you have enough money to buy, you can serve it for your friends, or you can eat it once a week or twice a week. The answer is yes, for the 4th and 5th century, especially for coastal cities. They bought the garum kind special foods from North Africa, with Spatei amphora shows also the connectivity. But after all, it stopped. The Western link is lost, and we don't know the details about the garum kind products. Continue to eat or stopped, or maybe the food culture changed.
Yes.
Because climate changed, the
Right.
economy changed. You know, that's my theory.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Well, if not, we'll let you all go. I know it's evening here and it's morning for many of you, but thank you very much, Asil, for this very interesting work in progress. We hope to see more of this very, very interesting work. And thank you for all the questions. Great discussion. And hope to see you all again soon. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. See you later.
Thank you, Asil.
Clay.
Bye, Clay. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Nancy, we have to meet sometime. I'd love to see you. And you, Asil. I need to go up to Narbert.
Yeah, please come and see us in Narbert. We miss you. Okay. Bye.